Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of This Week in Hearing. And I'm your host this week, Brian Taylor. And with me today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Terry Zwolan, who is the Senior Director of Medical Affairs at Cochlear Americas. Dr. Zwolan is a very well-known, very renowned audiologist, and she, over the last couple of years, has joined Cochlear Americas. And our topic this week is the evolution of cochlear implants and the Cochlear Care Consensus. Dr. Zwolan, I want to welcome you to This Week in Hearing. It's great to have you.
Oh, thank you so much. It's really great to be here.
And I hope you don't mind if we just use first names. Terry, okay?
Terry's perfect. Thanks, Brian.
Sure. Yeah, no need to be so formal. Um,
Great.
I thought before we dove into our topic at hand today, if you could maybe tell our audience a little bit about your background.
Happy to. I recently retired a few years ago from the University of Michigan, where I was director of the cochlear implant there. I was at Michigan for 31 years, which means that I was at sort of the beginning of cochlear implants. So it's really been a pleasure and a blessing for me to travel this journey from the very beginning of when implants were first introduced. And I joined Cochlear a little over 3 years ago.
Okay. Well, you're well positioned then to kind of look at the big picture of how things have evolved over time.
Yeah, it's been a real fun journey to see. If I look back on my younger self, and I never would have guessed that implants would have progressed as far as they have. The outcomes are just amazing. It's really been incredible to be part of it.
And so maybe tell us a little bit about some of that evolution over time and maybe how that's contributed to changes in care.
Yeah, absolutely. With the very first early clinical trials in the 80s, we didn't know what to do with implant patients. We were kind of building the pathway of care. And a lot of it was dictated by clinical trials because the manufacturers told us how many times we had to see patients and what we had to do during those appointments. And it's interesting to look back because a lot of that stuck. A lot of the frequent evaluations that we did to demonstrate safety efficacy, clinicians have maintained and they keep evaluating our patients. And we didn't decrease appointments. In those early clinical trials, we saw patients 9 times the first year, and it totaled about 26 hours with our patients. But if we think about it, they didn't have any volume control. So anytime they needed it turned up or turned down, they had to go back to the clinic. They had one program, so they couldn't try a different program that might sound better. So they had to come back to the clinic. The appointments were really long. Our activations took 8 hours. We had to measure every single electrode, and 22 electrodes with a soft and a loud sound. That's a lot of measurements.
Wow.
It took a lot of work. And now we fast forward to today, and our programming is faster. Our processors hold 4 programs. Patients can adjust volume. So our care should change because the technology has changed, the clinical care has changed, our patients have changed. They used to have no hearing. They were really hard to communicate with. We had to write to them. Now our patients come in with sometimes normal hearing in the other ear, which makes it more challenging to map because their hearing's too good in the other ear that it sometimes interferes with their mapping. So things have really changed. So it was a good time for us to look at how we're doing things and have we changed enough as technology and as clinical care and as our patient base has changed.
Yeah, let's dig into that a little bit more. I mean, that's a really interesting and unique perspective to think about all how cumbersome it was 30 years ago to program and work with somebody with a cochlear implant. What are some of the challenges that clinicians face today compared to what you just mentioned?
Yeah, it's interesting looking back because we had a lot of time. We'd have 2 hours with the patient. We got to know our patients really well, a lot of informal assessment. And in today's clinical care, I think clinicians are stressed with less time and patients really don't want to come back as often either. So it's really a challenge to get them hearing the best that they can in a quicker amount of time or in less time in the clinic. And our patients really expect more and they want to do more independently. So technology changes have done that. Clinicians have tried to foster that amongst our patients. So some of those changes have really been beneficial. The other thing we see is clinicians are multifaceted. When I started with implants, most clinicians spent all their time just doing implants, highly specialized. I would say today clinicians spend about 25% of their time doing implants and 75% of their time doing other things. When you're just completely immersed in implants, you get really good at it really fast. But when you only spend a quarter of your time on it, it takes longer to try new things, to learn new things, to really get quick and good at it. So I think today's clinicians with those time constraints and with those multifaceted career things that they have to do, really want guidance and want to know how do I get my patient hearing the best that they can as quickly as I can.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how things have changed over the last 3 or 4 decades.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the Cochlear Care Consensus. It's something new to me. I really don't know much about it. So if you could tell us a little bit about what that is and why it might be needed.
Yeah, thank you for that question. It's been such a great experience to be part of this. A group of us were talking and thought, clinicians want guidance, clinicians need guidance, and who better than to give them guidance than a panel of experts? If you look at the literature, not everything that we do with implant care has a real strong evidence base. Sometimes we start practicing in clinic, and it takes a couple of years for that to reach the literature. So we wanted to give specific guidance to clinicians about clinical care from experts. So the consensus was developed with a lead. Renee Gifford served as the consensus lead. We invited 10 panel experts, and each panel expert was given a topic to look at. They then went and reviewed the literature and developed protocols for that area of expertise. And then sometimes it's evidence based, most of it is evidence based, but when it's not, it's important to supplement with clinical expertise. So this really provides the best of both worlds. It has evidence base as well as all of the clinical expertise to say, this is how I use the evidence in my daily practice. And to be able to give those clinicians information about how to get the best outcomes for our patients while still being efficient and really having it be modern and not just doing things the way we did them because we've always done them that way. It gives an opportunity for us to look at how clinicians are integrating this new technology into their clinical care.
Well, that's good to know. One, I'm curious, how does the consensus differ from something I'm a little more familiar with, which is the clinical practice guidelines?
Yeah, and clinical practice guidelines are so valuable in our field. I think the big difference is that clinicians want specificity. So, an example might be the clinical practice guideline put out by AAA a few years ago on cochlear implants. Great guideline, and it's evidence-based as well, um, but it doesn't provide as much detail as, the consensus could. So, an example is rehab. The AAA consensus guideline says it's important to do rehabilitation with cochlear implant, recipients. Our consensus, we had agreement about when that is focused, how often patients should be participating in rehabilitation. So the big advantage of the consensus is we try to specify more detail to give clinical guidance rather than just saying, do this. It's more, this is how you do it. And this is how these experts have agreed is the best way to do it.
And you said there's a panel of 10 experts?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I can imagine the meetings and the back and forth, the debates that went on with something like that. Uh, could you give us a little bit more insight into uh, the process, what it was like to develop the Cochlear Care Consensus?
Yeah, it was so interesting, you're right. It was a really interesting panel, and to hear experts discuss how they do it and why they do it, and then have another expert go, "Oh, but I do it this way." And to see that was my favorite part about this was just listening to the discussion and how open everyone was to hearing how other people do it, and then looking at the evidence to kind of put it all together and then to come to an agreement, on it was really fabulous. So these experts took their area, they developed protocols about their area, and then they wrote what are called Likert statements that described the protocol. And then they all voted on these Likert statements. And we then evaluated which ones met consensus, which ones did not meet consensus, and which ones were near consensus. And the ones that were near consensus, our lead, Renee, would tip the scale to either make it meet consensus or not consensus. And we ended up with 57 statements that met consensus in these 5 different topic areas. Just the number of statements tells you the complexity of implant care that we have today, that there's so many statements with such great detail that clinicians can really find guidance if they look to these 57 statements.
Can you give us a little bit more around the what aspects of care were covered? I'm curious about that.
Yeah. Yeah, we had, several different aspects of care. We looked at programming and activation. I'm gonna bring up my list so that I don't miss any of them. Give me 2
Yeah, sure.
seconds here. Alright, so we looked at, programming and objective measures, which is really important. A lot of variability sometimes, on how clinicians will program devices, especially how often they'll program devices. And I think a dilemma is when someone comes in and they're doing great, do you need to program the device or not? Area 2 was evaluation and validation of performance. I think traditionally in implants, we've over tested our patients, and maybe we don't need to do that. So, this gives guidelines on how often you might need to test your patients. Contralateral ear considerations, especially since we've ventured into single-sided deafness and asymmetric hearing loss. We don't ever want to forget about the contralateral ear and when should patients be considered for bilateral or bimodal implants. Patient management considerations, so, things like rehabilitation um, and all of the different things that go into that patient management, and then we had our final one was cochlear tools and services because there are so many things specific to nucleus devices. They're programmed differently than other manufacturers' devices, and there's different tools and unique, and there's so many great tools. We wanted to know how clinicians are incorporating those tools into their practice, and so the consensus provides some guidance about how clinicians are using those tools.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious. Why are cochlear tools and services included? How is that part of the care or the consensus?
Yeah, it was really interesting to learn how clinicians are actively using them and what they had to say about them. So, an example is Remote Check, which is a great telehealth tool, and we learned that a lot of the clinicians on the panel are replacing an annual visit with a remote check. So the remote check has really great features where you can evaluate their hearing and noise. It does an impedance check. They take a picture of the incision and send it to the clinician. So it's a way to triage and say, you're doing great. You don't need to come back in, come see me a year from now. So it really helps triage. It takes about less than 15 minutes to evaluate a remote check versus a typical annual eval that takes about 90 minutes. So it's just a way for us to communicate with our patients, make sure that they're doing well so we all feel comfortable with how they're doing. Of course, if the remote check indicates that they're not doing as well as they have previously, then that indicates to us that they need to come in. So, other things like OMS, which is helpful with insurance coverage for cochlear implants. There's engagement managers that will talk to candidates before the process to give them information. A lot of these tools were developed to offload the non billable clinical care that clinicians have been providing because they're under such time constraints. So, these tools, it was great to hear how clinicians are using them so that they can really spend quality time with patients doing mapping and evaluations and taking that non billable care and giving it to someone else who can still provide that care.
Yeah, I can see how that would be really valuable, having this consensus. I guess my next question would be, how do you see the consensus impacting patients out in the real world?
I think one of the benefits of the consensus is I think it will sort of standardize care, and patients can be assured if someone's following these consensus statements that they'll be mapped optimally, that they won't be coming in, nine appointments a year or 7 appointments a year. It recommends activation 1 month, 3 months, and 12 months, which really streamlines things. And really, what was so interesting is the primary point for these clinicians was quality patient care. So I feel as though these experts were so focused on ensuring that what the guidance that they gave would result in excellent care that I think a lot of patients are going to benefit from it. One example is ESRTs, which are used to set the upper level of stimulation, and they're objective, they're evidence-based, and it's much more reliable than relying, like we used to, on patient report of what's loud and what's loud but comfortable or what's too loud. There's a lot of subjectivity when it comes to loudness, but ESRTs are really consistent, and if used consistently across clinics, I think patients will have more standardized care, and they'll all benefit from that.
Yeah, I think that I couldn't agree more. I think that one of the things I've always admired about cochlear implant audiologists and researchers like yourself is that you've set the bar pretty high for other areas of audiology to kind of aspire toward. Um, that's always great.
Oh, that's
Um,
nice to hear. I'm glad you said that.
you know, you guys are very much unlike some parts of audiology, very much focused on research and outcomes and things like that. And I think that's something that we all should be aiming toward in the clinic, regardless of what we do with what devices we might fit or recommend. Um,
Absolutely. Lots of questions to be asked, and a lot of research questions still remain.
yeah, exactly. Um, another question I have is this document uh, uh, is it focused on cochlear devices, Cochlear Americas devices, or is it more universal than that? If you could give us shed a little light on that.
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of nuggets in here that apply across the field, that apply to all manufactured devices. But there's also a lot in here that's specific to cochlear devices. So, an example of that is population mean, which is a tool that was developed to assist with programming. So, one of the statements was supporting use of population mean at activation. When you first turn a patient on, it takes a nice range of hearing, and it takes the threshold and the comfort level, and you just bring it up until the patient says it's, "Oh, that's a little too loud," and you adjust, and, it gets them to hear faster, better, and it's more consistent with a nice dynamic range, and so something like that is only cochlear based, so population mean isn't available in other ones, those tools and things that are specifically cochlear. And one of our experts at the very first meeting said that. Why are you doing this? Why can't we just make one that's, global for cochlear implants in general? And then the whole group started to talk and said, oh, there's a lot of specificity. And because we wanted it to be specific, it really made sense to just focus on cochlear.
Right, that makes sense because it's a lot of unique aspects of your particular devices, I would gather.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, let's say I'm a CI audiologist. I'm one of those individuals that maybe only spend 25% of my time with cochlear implant patients. Um, what practical steps could those kind of folks take to begin integrating these recommendations into their existing practice?
That's a great question because 57 statements is a lot to go through.
Right.
But I think once they start reading, they go, "Oh, that makes sense. I already do that. Oh, that makes sense. I haven't tried that yet. Maybe I should try that." What I would recommend is that clinicians look at those statements, and if there's something that jumps out at them as something they've been wanting to try, they can absolutely incorporate that into their protocol. Think it's great for clinicians. Let's say there's 4 audiologists in a program. Sometimes they're not always on the same page. It gives them a reason to discuss certain aspects of programming, certain aspects of the evaluation to make sure that even within their program, they're providing consistent care amongst each other. So I think it really gives food for thought on how they're practicing, and it gives them sort of a glimpse into how the experts are doing it and say, should I be doing it that way too?
My final question for you, Terry, is this: where can professionals learn more about the Cochlear Care Consensus?
I love that you asked that because we love for people to hear about it because we want this to be used. We want this to be helpful to clinicians. So much effort, time. These experts really did such a great job. Uh, Renee Gifford recently wrote a great Pro News article. So someone could Google Cochlear Pro News, Renee Gifford, and that will pop up. We are very close to completion of a manuscript for submission. So in that will be a real nice outline, details about how the evidence was gathered. All of the Likert statements will be included in that as well. We hosted a recent webinar, and we actually have some more panel discussions coming up. Those are fabulous. We've got panel members on because, as we discussed at the beginning, one of the best parts was the discussion that went on amongst the experts. And we're trying to replicate that for viewers so that they can, kind of feel like they were part of it. So those are coming up. And if people aren't able to attend those will be posted on the Cochlear Learning Center. So recorded versions of those are
Yeah,
also available.
that's excellent. And if they look below in the notes of this little broadcast, you'll see links to the websites and the other materials that you mentioned.
Perfect.
So,
Thank you for that.
and just to wrap everything up, I'm with Dr. Terry Zwolan, who's the Senior Director of Medical Affairs at Cochlear Americas, and we've been discussing their new, at least relatively new, Cochlear Care Consensus, where to find it, why they put it together, and all the different components of it. So, Terry, can't thank you enough for taking some time out of your busy schedule to be with us today.
Thank you so much, Brian.